Good evening and welcome to Echoes, a recorded feature heard on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays here at Family Radio, the sound of the new life. Speaking tonight on Echoes is Brother John McOwen of Ardsley, Pennsylvania. The title to his message is, Examine Your Marriage. Again, examine your marriage. Brother John McOwen will be reading from Ephesians chapter 5, verses 25 through 27. Once again, Ephesians chapter 5, verses 25 through 27. The length of the message is around 23 minutes. Here now on Echoes is Brother John McOwen.
Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. All right, we're on our first point then, husbands. I'm going to ask a question. With our reading, is the church perfect? Correct. Very good answer. Correct. Someone in the back said no. That is correct, because look at verse 26 and 27. What's the insinuation? If Christ has to sanctify and cleanse it, what's the insinuation? It's dirty. Right. Very good. And look at verse 27. That he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle. Well, it was spotty and very wrinkled to begin with. So, Christ loves the church in spite of her deficiencies. Is that correct? From our reading, thus Christ loved us while we were yet sinners. He loved the church not because she was beautiful and glorious, but to make her such. So what is this to say to husbands? Well, when the husband comes up against difficulties or deficiencies in his wife, things which he feels he can criticize, he is to love her in spite of those failures. Do you get the message? Should this be as easy for us husbands as it is for Christ to love the church? Yeah, it should be easier. It should be even easier, because if Christ is looking at the church from the vantage point of a perfect person, as Jesus Christ was, without sin, how much more difficult was it to love wretched, sinful people like us? But us husbands, don't we have it easier looking at our wives? Because aren't we deficient also? So isn't it an easier vantage point to see? Because if I myself am a sinner and weak and I have failures and deficiencies, it should be pretty easy for me to relate to my wife, shouldn't it? So it should be a pretty easy task to do. So we should have, therefore, no problem as a husband in not criticizing our spouses. Do you have that down now? Does that make sense? Here's the application. Husband, I want you to answer this question in your own mind. I don't want to see a raising of hands. Have you at all this month criticized your wife? At all? Now you can answer that yourself. Have I criticized my wife this month? Now, here's what we are striving for. Husband, we should never criticize our wife. Notice I use the word criticize. We should never criticize our wife. Any deficiency or sin that you see in your wife should be dealt with in a kind, loving, and compassionate setting with the utmost respect for her feelings. Because aren't we in the same boat, weak, deficient, and sinful ourselves? Is it ever pleasant to be criticized? No. Sometimes we need it, but as a husband, our point number one today is we should never, ever criticize our wives. There are better ways of handling deficiencies or shortcomings in our spouse. The second point is to be like Christ, who gave himself for the church. Who gave himself. That was verse 25 of Ephesians 5. Jesus Christ gave himself for it, the church. Verse 23, just 2 verses earlier, states that the husband is the head of the wife, but it is immediately followed by what we just read in verse 25. But he gave himself for her. God is showing that when a man loved his wife as he should, he will not be tyrannical and dictatorial, even though he occupies a God-given role as her head. He must balance that power with proper love. A husband's not a petty little dictator. And I hope that's not describing any of you here. A husband is not to trample his wife underfoot. Rather, the husband is to exercise his authority in the home in a balanced fashion. His leadership should be permeated with a sacrificial love, giving himself for his wife. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's do an application. I'm going to ask the question, husband, when's the last time you said to your wife, we're doing it this way because I said so? We're doing it this way because I said so. When's the last time you've said that, if ever, to your wife? Now, the next time you feel like saying that, I want you first to understand what your wife's point of view is. I mean, really understand it from her perspective, not yours. Then, once you understand the issue from her perspective, then seek to be understood. And if that's the case, if you're able to do that, once you try to have her understand your point of view, perhaps there's a third alternative other than just you or her getting your way. What do I mean by that? Well, a solution that would incorporate both of your ideas in a synergistic win-win solution. I'm going to give you a word picture here. What am I holding up in front of me? Any children know what kind of a triangle this is? What am I trying to model here? Picture one side. This corner here is the husband. The other corner is the wife. Notice they're equal. When we compromise, what's the typical way to compromise? Don't we try to move to the midpoint of the base of that triangle? And maybe we meet halfway? But what do I mean by giving yourself? As Christ gave himself for the church. What happened when Christ gave himself? Wasn't there an incredible win-win for both? Didn't the bride of Christ receive the most incredible gift of all? And didn't Jesus Christ receive the benefit of his bride? He won his bride through Calvary. Look at the apex of the triangle up top. You see what I mean by synergy? If you both, if husband, if you give yourself for your wife to seek to understand her viewpoint, perhaps you reach the apex, a better solution that neither of the two of you thought initially. Let me show this so that people in the corner can see it as well. You see what I mean? By giving yourself just doesn't mean you go to your wife's corner. You may do that sometimes, but I'm talking the ultimate is when you both meet at the top. A synergistic win-win solution where you incorporate your wife's viewpoint, her feelings, why she felt the way she did about an issue. Perhaps you find a better solution than just your way or her way. All right, that's point number 2. Husbands, let's look at a third way that we can be a better husband and have a better marriage. Number 3, your wife necessitates your time and attention. And I get that from 1 Corinthians chapter 7. So let's go there. There's 2 verses we're going to look at. 1 Corinthians 7, verse 32 and 33. This is a pretty big issue. This may be self-evident. Of course my wife needs my time and attention. But look at how God describes it. Verse 32 of 1 Corinthians 7, but I would have you without carefulness or anxiety. He that is unmarried careth for the things that belong to the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But he that is married careth for the things that are of the world, how he may please his wife. Husband, take a long look at verse 33. You must seek out ways to please your wife. That means you need to understand her. What she rates as special, not what you think, but actually what she really genuinely wants and needs. I'm not talking about sinful needs or desires. I'm talking about legitimate, wholesome needs and desires that your wife would have. I would have you without carefulness. He that does unmarried care for the things that belong to the Lord, how he may please the Lord. A single person has a lot more freedom to do what they want. A married man needs to balance his life, and he must seek out ways to please his wife. She needs it. So man, if you as a husband are not spending time with your wife, you're sinning. Now, it may be that you have a hobby that consumes your time. Perhaps you bought a classic car and you're in the garage 4 nights out of 7 working on it. That's probably a problem, I would say. Or it may be what I just insinuated earlier. Perhaps you're doing something that seems very positive and holy, but you do it at the expense of your family and your wife. You can go overboard with that. So here's the application for that. Husband, find out the specific likes and dislikes, the emotional needs, the desires of your wives. Don't assume to know them. Make certain what they are by simply asking her. If you don't know what some of the special needs are of your wife, ask her. Sit down one night with her and have a quiet time and just ask her, what are some of the things that you really, really like to do? Perhaps it's going out on a picnic at a park once in a while during good weather, and you've never done that, or you've done it once in the whole summer. It could be a million other things that really rank as special for your wife. Then, husband, seek out ways to meet those needs and desires. And here's an easy way to do it. There are 12 months in a year, maybe one time every month, you're going to meet a special need or desire of your wife by doing that something special. So maybe you can get a list of things by talking to your wife this week of what some of those special issues are, what some of those needs are. Maybe she does want you to be around more at night after work. And maybe you can say to yourself, once a month, I am going to meet a special need of my wife that I've not done in the past, and I am going to commit to doing something different every month. All right, now let's switch gears and talk about wives. So wives, you put your volume on your ears, turn it up high. Let's get ready to learn a few things about being a better wife. We're going to look at 3 simple things also as wives. 3 simple things that can make me a better wife and therefore enhance my marriage. Let's go back to Ephesians 5. Verse 22 and 23. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Point number 1, wives, submissiveness. Submissiveness. What does it mean to be a submissive wife? That's what we're going to look at briefly here in our first point today. Let's go to Colossians 3 and see it reiterated. Again, submissiveness. Colossians chapter 3, verse 18. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as it is fit in the Lord. And it's a whole lot easier to do when you have a godly husband. So, wife, if you have a godly husband, be thankful. It's 10 times easier to submit under his authority and rule than it would be an unsaved husband. Well, now, why is a woman to submit? Why? Wives, we have to understand why before we're motivated to do it. It's by virtue of God's creative order, is it not? Let's look at an example in 1 Corinthians 11. Wives, look at 1 Corinthians 11, verse 3. But I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God. Wife, take note. You are to submit to your husbands as Christ submits to God the Father. What did Christ say in the Garden of Gethsemane? Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. Remember he said that? But notice, is not Christ equal to God? Yet he submitted to the Father because of the chain of command that the Father has set up. Wife, are you not equal to your husband? Yes, you are. We are all men and women created in the image of God. Though I am equal with my husband, nonetheless, we are given this biblical chain of command. So in my submission to my husband, I'm submitting to Christ because he's my head, as Christ is the head of the believer. So when you, next time, wife, when you have a difficult issue and a difficult time in submitting, think about submitting to Christ. And the fact that you're submitting to your husband is equivalent to submitting to Christ because he is your head. So here's an application. Wife, think back to the last time you rebelled against the decision of your husband. Maybe it was just this past week. I hope not, but perhaps it was in your family. Now look forward into next week and anticipate an opportunity where your natural flesh is going to want to pick a fight. Now visualize yourself responding differently by gently submitting instead of fighting back. Can you anticipate an opportunity where that might arise next week? I want you to anticipate it, and this time visualize yourself submitting gently, quietly. All right, that's one point, but we're going to talk about 3 for the wives. Our second point of how to be a better wife. It's guiding the house. It's my role of guiding the house. 1 Timothy chapter 5. What does that mean, to guide the house? 1 Timothy chapter 5 in verse 14. Let's see what it says for us wives in the room here. 1 Timothy 5:14. I will, therefore, that the younger women marry, bear children, guide the house, give none occasion to the adversary to speak reproachfully, for some are already turned aside after Satan. You know what it means to guide the house? Listen up to this one, because this is a really good lesson in a biblical injunction for a role of a wife. To guide the house literally means to rule the house. And I know what you're thinking. As soon as I said that, isn't that the husband's role? To rule the house? How could it be that as a wife I'm to rule the house? Well, the Greek word to guide or to rule is a verb meaning to manage the house. So the husband needs to lead the house with the proper biblical vision, while the wife needs to manage, making sure the day-to-day operation of the house is in keeping with that vision. Here's the application. Wife, are you managing the house diligently? Wife, are you managing the house diligently? Or are you waiting for the husband to come home from work and deal with the mess that the kids have made of themselves? You have to answer that question for yourself today. What an awesome responsibility and privilege to be a house manager, right? Think about that. You and your husband set the role of what we're going to do in the house, and the husband takes the lead in that, of course. But once you've defined how the household should be run, what we should be doing, biblically speaking, the wife is then to implement that day-to-day operation. Because if you're only home for 4 hours a night, but she's with the kids 16 hours a day, doesn't she therefore have a whole lot more influence on how things are run? So she has to be the day-to-day operational manager of the house. Husbands have to give the wife that role, that responsibility, And then, of course, just like in a business, you meet periodically to see if things are being accomplished properly. And it doesn't have to be just in a house with kids. If you don't have children, it's still the way you're conducting the family unit in public and in your own private lives. So, wife, it's a huge responsibility. Am I managing the house diligently? Well, let's go to the third and our last way this morning. We're going to look at being a better wife. It's to have a meek and quiet spirit. Wonderful quality that the Bible actually commands for a woman to have. Let's look at 1 Peter 3 and read about it. 1 Peter chapter 3, and then we're going to define the word. It's a great description that the Bible gives us. And therefore, let's look at 1 Peter 3, starting in verse 1. Likewise, ye wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, they also may without the word be won by the conversation or conduct of the wives, while they behold your chaste conduct coupled with fear, whose adorning, let it not be the outward adorning of plaiting the hair and wearing of gold and putting on of apparel, but let it be the hidden man of the heart, in that which is not corruptible, even the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit, and listen to this, which is in the sight of God of great price. God esteems a meek and quiet spirit more valuable than we as a nation or a people esteem gold and silver. And is there anything more valuable than gold and silver and diamonds? Not really. Not on this earth. Not as far as raw materials go. So if God esteems a meek and quiet spirit more than that, you get the idea of how important it is to God for you wives to have a meek and quiet spirit. Now, what does it mean to be meek? Matthew 21, an example of meekness. The same word meekness is used here in verse 5. Matthew 21:5. Tell ye the daughter of Zion, behold, thy king cometh unto thee, meek, and sitting upon an ass, and a colt, the foal of an ass. Who's that speaking about? Jesus Christ. I see many of you got that right. When? Palm Sunday, a week before he was crucified. The king coming unto thee meek. That's the Lord Jesus Christ, the greatest model of meekness we could ever have. Wife, next time you have a hard time being meek in front of your husband, think about Jesus Christ. There we read it on Palm Sunday and how he exercised that meekness. So here's the application. Wife, when's the last time you were injured by something your husband said or did, and instead of enduring it patiently, you struck back like a snake, snapped right back at your husband? Now, imagine yourself in that same situation, maybe next week, but this time you endure whatever that injury was that you perceive to be. This time you endure it without any caustic words, and especially without resenting your husband.